morning, Ewa Krzaklewska from Poland. Would you like to introduce yourself firstly?
Good morning. I'm working at the Jagiellonian University of Krakow as a sociologist and researcher, and I was involved in the development on youth policies for already many years. Since my university studies, I was involved in the mobility program of Erasmus and supporting international students in during exchanges, working later in Brussels for the Erasmus Student Network and developing some support structures for incoming students in the foreign countries. And later on, I got involved in the youth research, still researching mobility, but also wider issues also in relation to youth work, youth worker education, non-formal learning, also non-formal learning through mobility.
So you have a Polish perspective and a European perspective too. Perhaps you can answer in both directions. Which successes and strengths in youth work could your country, could Poland share to enrich the debate and practice in Europe? What can we learn from Poland?
I think Poland is a country where youth work is really grassrooted, so it really comes from the bottom, from people's initiative. There are plenty of NGOs, clubs, different projects that are run by young people. So I think this dynamic dimension of youth work in Poland is something very valuable. And also Polish youth work is very strongly connected to Europe, and young people are very much cheering the possibilities from the European Union in relation to mobilities, exchanges. So there was also always a big motivation to take part in something wider than just youth work in Poland, and to share experiences and exchanges with other European countries.
Mm-hmm. And what are the three main challenges for youth work in Poland?
Three main challenges. What are the challenges for youth work in Poland? That's not an easy question. I think maybe there are more than three, and they are not equally distributed in Poland. I think from a very kind of long-term perspective of my work in youth work, so 15 years, in Poland we do not have very strong structures for youth work. Youth work is not kind of a very self-evident field of activity. It rather links to other different activities like social work, NGO work, education. So that was maybe something that was weaker in Poland, that organizations, youth clubs always had to kind of fight for funding, for survival from different perspectives, because they weren't, since many years, there hasn't been these very strong structures to support youth work. There is this trend of youth work in Poland, which is linked to social work and linked to the national structures. So there are daycare centers all around Poland. There are really many, thousands, but they reach to a certain group of young people who are under 18 usually, and come from disadvantaged backgrounds. So these youth clubs have structures, but these structures are available for some part of young people. The rest of young people, so for example, those who are above 18 or those who want to engage into more kind of non-formal learning initiatives based on their personal initiative and agency, these usually young people engage in NGOs work in Poland, and sometimes in some school-based youth work activities, maybe also church-based activities as well, because we have this dimension present here as well. And this youth work doesn't have structures; it's really grassroots. So on one hand, we have this strength that when we don't have structures, the young people and facilitators and also adults who are very engaged and supporting young people. So somehow this is made up for. And maybe added value. But on the other hand, in some crisis situations, maybe like now pandemic, or then the youth work is struggling. One example was where the financial cuts, for example, for what we have in Poland, like culture houses. So there were proposals to cut funding, for example, for these culture houses, where a lot of non-formal activities are happening. So I think we had to really underline that without this structural funds, it will be difficult to do quality youth work and maybe more accessible youth work. In Krakow, for example, I was engaged in designing youth strategy for this period now of 5 years, and the main voice of young people, the main, let's say, thing they wanted is to create more spaces for young people, for teenagers, for people who are above 18, who want to just have place to meet where they don't have to pay, where they can root their activities or hobbies, or just spend free time and learn. So that was the main postulate from young people, and that demands structural funding very much. That we need to keep the infrastructure and the people who are engaged in running such infrastructure. So I think we need more spaces for young people where they can hang out. This is, I think, not only for Krakow, but also for other cities and rural areas all over Poland. Mm-hmm. So that would be maybe the second challenge. And one more challenge that you were asking about. I think that the challenge, it's not only for Poland, but it's maybe for adults all around Europe and for politicians all around Europe, is to see young people as citizens, as people, as adults, to remember about the UN Convention about children's rights, so that young people are independent, let's say, subjects of politics of society, and they have a right to for their political standings, they have a right to gather, to organize, and we need to see them as independent, as agents in the society. So not just to provide for them, but also to create spaces where they could act and they could enact those rights.
Mm-hmm. And thinking of the aims of the youth work agenda, you know, the 8 aims of which it describes. Where do you see the greatest need for further development of youth work in Poland and in Europe too? It's
I'm looking at those aims. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to. So when it comes to European youth work, I think it's important to look very strongly through aim 4, so to strengthen the common ground of youth work, and also this thinking of youth work as a very wide and important community of practice, where maybe we have different stakeholders, different groups, different young people, but we share some general ideas about young people's role in society, and also about societal values. So I think this aim for remembering we are the European youth work for which values as democracy, as tolerance, as human rights are in the center. So this thinking of youth work as an area where we have particular also vision for the society. I think this is something that European youth work shouldn't forget about. And we have also values which link more to the way we work as youth work, that we see young people as independent, that their participation is voluntary, that they are learning through non-formal learning, and that adults are more like facilitators than those who will impose young people certain activities, even if there are maybe some variations in different activities of youth work, how much these different aims are guarded, but in general we have a common vision, and I think it's important to remember about it. Also in this pandemic crisis that we have now in Europe and in the world, where where the situation is not easy, and where a lot of people also need youth work to rebuild maybe relationships with other young people, to be back in the let's say real buildings and meetings, and to receive support, because as most research is showing, the pandemic has a very strong impact of young people. And young people, it reminds us about topics like well-being of young people, mental health, which has to be considered in youth work, and has to be considered even more now. And I think one more thing that struck me when I was reading about this impact of pandemic on the young people is that young people, many young people, maybe not all, but there is a share of young people that lost kind of a vision for the future, or maybe a hope for the future. And that's very important that we try to support them in finding their way in society, to maybe try to feed them with some tools, or to reflect about this future, and maybe give some more optimism, which may be sometimes difficult, but to at least provide them with some tools so that they feel hopeless and passive, but they become also agents in the society, and maybe that will some change this pessimistic attitude that some young people right now have.
You mentioned research. Which role can research play for the development of youth work in Europe?
I think it's critical that we have now more research in relation to youth work. Youth research that documents what youth work is doing, how they are doing it, who is doing it, what competences these people have, and what tools they are using, what outcomes youth work brings. And this is very important for building the community of practice of youth work, and also recognition of youth work. We need to document what youth work is doing, what is the outcomes of youth work, and it has to, and we need, I think, also developing theory of youth work, and we have a lot of exchange of good practices, and we have a lot of fantastic examples of youth work, and I think we have to even stronger, because it's of course happening. It's not that it's not existing, but I think we need to develop also theories, and also strong methodologies and pedagogical also approaches in youth work, and discuss it, and critically analyze them. So this is another thing that could go somehow in parallel to what youth workers are doing on everyday basis. This is maybe a job to be done by researchers, but I think it's very important. In this research about youth worker education, the youth workers who completed some courses or university studies around youth work all underline that theoretical framework for the work was very important. It was seen in some research that Council of Europe was facilitating.
What are your expectations towards the implementing the youth work, the European youth work agenda in this respect? What can Europe do to bring forward in the Bonn process, so-called youth work in Poland and in Europe?
So how the Bonn process could be beneficial for youth work? This is what you mean?
For youth work or for your research activities?
I think that would be good if there are some maybe funding for research around youth work, and that the Bonn process engages also with the community of researchers, and somehow steers up initiative of researchers, and supports maybe networks of researchers who are engaged in the topic. So that would be maybe some supportive actions that help to develop this strand of research around youth work. Hopefully, this process will bring also more recognition to this work and the importance of this research area. And so this hopefully could somehow be of mutual benefit, you know. So researchers could feed into the bond process, but also the bond process and its visibility could bring some recognition to researcher work, and maybe to somehow also a bit inspire more work in this area. This I think could I think yesterday I was on the meeting of the network. I'm not sure if I can say this name. It's a network of youth work educators. Maybe that's not an official name of the network, but that's I just met with those researchers yesterday, and they were these are people who are engaged in educating youth workers
at university or
yes. So they are those initiatives around, and I think it's important to make them visible, and also I think there's no limit for networks or for communities of practice that could work together to strengthen youth work.
So I wish you good luck for networking and your research work, and thank you very much for this interview.
Thank you, Helen.
Bye.